The letter arrived on a gray, drizzly Thursday morning, its envelope soaked at the corners and smelling faintly of damp ink. I stared at the bold, formal letters on the envelope. Inheritance notice, from your late husband, Robert Caldwell. My hands shook as I carefully slid it open, my mind racing. Memories of our marriage, once full of promise, now just a string of cold silences and quiet betrayals, rushed back with every heartbeat. Inside, the words were clear, almost cruel in their simplicity. I had inherited the Caldwell family farm. I sank into the nearest chair, the letter trembling in my hands. The farm was described as a sprawling, run-down property on the outskirts of town, complete with a collapsing barn, overgrown fields, and a farmhouse that had clearly been abandoned for years. A single sentence, almost mocking in its detachment, lingered in my mind. May this inheritance bring you purpose. The real sting came when I learned that my son, Ethan, had received a $5 million penthouse in the city. A lavish, gleaming testament to his father's favoritism. My world tilted, disbelief and fury battling within me. I had been left with nothing but dust and decay, while Ethan's life was already paved with gold and luxury. For a long moment, I felt like the world itself was laughing at me. I made my way to the farm the next day, the gravel crunching under my boots as I approached the crumbling farmhouse. Its windows were clouded with dirt, the paint peeled in long, curling strips, and the fence sagged, barely standing. The scent of damp wood and mold filled the air, sharp and bitter. I hesitated at the door, staring at the overgrown yard that had once been the pride of my husband's family. It seemed to mock me, a tangible reminder of how I had been overlooked, dismissed, and betrayed, but amid the disappointment, a small, stubborn spark of determination lit within me. If this farm was my inheritance, then it would become my battlefield. I would not let it remain a symbol of loss or humiliation. Step by step, I would restore it, rebuild it, and transform it into something vibrant and thriving. Something that reflected the woman I had always been beneath the weight of neglect. As I pushed open the creaking door, rain dripping from my coat and hair, I made a silent vow. This farm, this forgotten land, would become my triumph. Not for anyone else's eyes, not for recognition, but for myself. And perhaps, when the time came, those who had underestimated me, my husband, my son, the world, would finally see that I was no one's doormat. I was a force to be reckoned with. The first weeks on the farm were brutal. My hands became raw and blistered from digging through soil that hadn't seen care in years, my back ached as I bent over stubborn weeds taller than my knees, and my boots sank into mud that refused to give way. Every creaking plank and broken fence post reminded me of the years of neglect, the years I had been treated as invisible. Yet, amid the exhaustion, there was a strange kind of liberation. For the first time in years, I was working for myself, shaping something that would endure, something that was mine alone. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skeletal trees surrounding the property, I ventured into the old barn. Its rafters groaned under age, and a thick layer of dust covered every surface. While sweeping away years of neglect, my hand caught on a loose floorboard near the far corner. Curious, I pried it up and found a hidden compartment beneath. Inside were old ledgers, yellowed letters, and a stack of legal documents that made my stomach twist. Reading through them, the bitter truth hit me like a physical blow. Robert hadn't just left me with a decrepit farm out of negligence. He had deliberately redirected the family fortune, funneling it into accounts under Ethan's name while ensuring I received nothing but this crumbling property. The betrayal was deeper than I had realized. It had been orchestrated, calculated, and cold. I sank to the floor, trembling with fury and grief, but in the midst of my tears, a new determination began to burn. I would not let this farm remain a symbol of my husband's cruelty. I would turn it into something extraordinary, a place that reflected strength, resilience, and purpose. If Robert had underestimated me, if he had thought this land would break me, he had miscalculated. I started small, repairing fences, clearing weeds, and planting hardy vegetables. I hired a few local workers who whispered their doubts but eventually began to admire my determination. Slowly, the farm started to respond to my care. The overgrown fields began to breathe again, the barn no longer seemed ready to collapse, and the farmhouse, still rough, still weathered, started to feel like home. More than the physical labor, the farm gave me something I hadn't realized I needed: control. For decades, I had been overlooked, treated as expendable, but here, every decision, every action mattered. I was building a future from the ruins of the past. And in that quiet, exhausting work, I found the beginning of a plan, not just to survive, but to thrive. Revenge, I realized, didn't need to be loud. It didn't need to sting with malice. Sometimes, it was simple: grow where others expected you to wither, bloom where they thought you were broken, and make them watch quietly as you rose. Months had passed since I had first set foot on the farm, and the transformation was undeniable. The fields, once choked with weeds, were now neat rows of vegetables and fruits, glistening with morning dew. The barn, reinforced and repurposed, had become a charming storage and work area, its rough beams now polished and sturdy. Even the farmhouse, though still weathered, radiated warmth and life, the scent of fresh paint mingling with the earthy aroma of soil and crops. I had created something that thrived under my care, a tangible proof that resilience could turn neglect into prosperity. Then came the unexpected visit. Ethan pulled up one afternoon in his sleek, polished car, the city's gloss reflected in his designer shoes and tailored suit. He stepped out, a faint smile of amusement tugging at his lips, his eyes taking in the farm with what seemed like mild incredulity. "Mom, what have you done to this place?" he asked, his tone hovering between disbelief and condescension. I wiped the dirt from my hands and gave him a small, steady smile. "I made it mine," I said simply. My voice carried the quiet confidence I had cultivated through months of relentless work and determination. Ethan's smile faltered slightly as he surveyed the thriving fields, the restored barn, and the signs of life and activity that surrounded me. He tried to assert his familiar dominance, speaking of city investments, networks, and luxury, as though these could outshine the life I had built here. I listened patiently, then interrupted, calmly but firmly. "All the money in the world can't buy what I've built here, Ethan. Not just the farm, but my independence, my strength, and my life. You may have inherited a penthouse, but I inherited myself. And that inheritance is worth far more than gold." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. The amusement in his eyes vanished, replaced by something unfamiliar: uncertainty. I could see the shift in him, the realization that this farm, once dismissed as worthless, was a testament to more than just hard work. It was proof of perseverance, of rising above betrayal, of taking control when the world had tried to deny you power. Watching him struggle to reconcile his assumptions with reality, I felt a quiet satisfaction. This wasn't about gloating or revenge in the traditional sense. It was about truth, about showing that resilience and determination were stronger than wealth, stronger than favoritism, and stronger than betrayal. Ethan left that day with a silence that spoke louder than words. I watched his sleek car disappear down the winding road, knowing that the seeds of respect, and perhaps a hint of humility, had been planted. And in that quiet, golden afternoon, I understood that sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply living well, thriving, and letting those who doubted you witness your rise. Years passed, and the farm that had once been a symbol of neglect and betrayal had become something remarkable. What had started as a rundown, abandoned stretch of land was now a thriving hub of life and productivity. The fields yielded abundant crops, the barn hummed with activity, and the farmhouse, once dilapidated, radiated warmth and charm. Local restaurants and markets clamored for my produce, and people from the neighboring towns visited just to witness the transformation of a property that had seemed destined for ruin. I walked through the fields one early morning, the golden light of sunrise spilling across rows of ripening vegetables, and breathed in the sweet, earthy scent of growth. Each blade of grass, each stalk of corn, was a testament to months and years of labor, patience, and persistence. I remembered the anger and bitterness that had consumed me when I first inherited this farm. Now, it had been replaced by pride and a profound sense of accomplishment. I had turned betrayal into purpose, neglect into opportunity, and despair into triumph. Ethan came to visit again, this time not as the skeptical, spoiled son I had once known, but as someone humbled by the sheer magnitude of what I had achieved. He stayed for dinner, and for the first time in years, we spoke openly. We talked about the past, our father's choices, and the pain that had been left in the wake of his betrayal. I forgave him, not because I had to, but because holding on to resentment no longer served me. This farm, and what I had become in the process, was the ultimate closure. The greatest satisfaction, however, was quiet and personal. I no longer needed anyone's recognition to feel worthy. The farm had given me something far more valuable than money or prestige. It had given me control over my life and the undeniable knowledge that I could rise, no matter the odds. Where others saw dust, rot, and decay, I saw potential. Where they expected me to crumble, I had flourished, and so, as I stood on the porch, watching the sunlight stretch across the fields, I smiled softly. Sweet revenge, I realized, was not about hurting anyone else. It was about thriving in the face of betrayal, proving your worth to yourself, and reclaiming the life you were always meant to live. The farm was my victory, my legacy, and my testament to resilience. I had inherited not just land, but life itself. And in that inheritance, I found a triumph far richer than any penthouse or inheritance of gold.